welcome you to a workshop being sponsored by Hebrew at the Center. This workshop is really focused on a target audience of Hebrew leaders and school leaders who are interested in exploring the topic of the relationship between modern Hebrew and biblical Hebrew. This is a topic that really interests many people who are working in the field. Should they be teachers? Should they be department heads, curriculum providers, foundations, organizations that are just engaged in Hebrew teaching. And we have we have Dr. Rena Kreitman at our head of our professional learning department, and she's put together this series. And for this particular session, she's invited Dr. Tali Artman Partok to speak with us. She'll introduce her in a minute. I do want to just note that there are two other members of our Hebrew at the Center staff on this call. One is Liat Kadosh. She is our Director of Embedded Expertise, usually sitting in Atlanta, currently sitting in Eretz Israel. And introduce Jeremy Benstein, Dr. Jeremy Benstein, who is one of our senior consultants. Jeremy actually gave a lecture on the history of the Hebrew language a few days ago, which we will also be sharing on our site and are happy for you to look at. And Jeremy is also located in Israel. Rena's in Wales. And so we really try to be as international as possible in our representation. Thank you for joining us today. We hope that this will be a productive learning opportunity, and we look forward to learning with you. So with that, Rena, I turn it to you. תודה רבה.
זה כבוד and a pleasure להציג את דוקטור טלי ארטמן פרטוק. As this is supposed to be in English, I will introduce her in English. Tali holds a PhD degree from Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Currently, she teaches rabbinic literature at the Faculty of Divinity at Cambridge and at Leo Baeck College in London. She's the convener of the UK Rabbinic Network and has taught in Israel, the UK, and the US. Her research is focused on comparing Jewish and Christian engagements in late antiquity with ideas inherited from the Hellenistic world, as well as on women and law in rabbinic literature. Among her publication recently, No Jewish Women in Hell and Laughing in the Face of Patriarchy. Tali, I give the floor to you.
Thank you, Rena, and thank you, Tal and Hebrew at the Center for inviting me, and all of you for showing up. I think I was invited because I'm one of those people who teaches Hebrew in many different contexts. So I come from a university like higher education background in which you teach Hebrew to students who are really interested in learning the language. And I also teach at a rabbinical college in which the needs of Hebrew are very different. I also work in a congregational setting in which I teach children Hebrew. So I think I kind of have an interesting position in terms of understanding what different needs are in different communities and what levels of Hebrew can or should or could be introduced in different types of settings. I think for most teachers of Hebrew, there are two fears. One is that no matter what we do, our students will not learn anything. And B, that we're teaching the wrong thing, that we're really investing our heart and soul in something, and this might not be the most important thing that we can do for our students. And if you live in a community in which the general knowledge of Hebrew, the general level is not very well, I think I have a short video that I think exemplifies our fear or my fear and the challenges. This is actually a really interesting story about a guy in Mumbai who writes all the Jewish headstones.
We have no sound.
טלי, את צריכה לעשות share sound. את יודעת
Oh,
איך עושים את
Okay,
זה?
so you can't hear the sound.
No.
Okay, I'll do it
you know how
again.
to do it?
I do know how to do it.
Okay.
Share sound. I'm saying you figure. I'm not going to start it over because you figured out what's going on. Just want to show you the level of his Hebrew.
अभी यहाँ फिलहाल तो मैं अकेले ही काम करता हूँ, हिब्रू लिखने वाला कोई अभी यहाँ पर नहीं है।
Yasin came to Mumbai as a 27-year-old in 1968 from Jaunpur, Uttar Pradesh, to find work as a sculptor. A chance meeting with the caretaker of the Jewish cemetery in Worli changed his line of work forever. He had to start from scratch and first learn Hebrew.
उर्दू भी राइट हैंड से चलता है, हिब्रू भी राइट हैंड से चलता है। हरफ में तो फर्क है, लेकिन बोलने में फर्क नहीं है। अल्ली बे ते से ऐसे हिब्रू में भी आता है, इंग्लिश में भी आता है।
Like Hebrew and Urdu, the lives of Jews and Muslims in Mumbai have intertwined for centuries. India's Jewish community has long roots. Tradition maintains that the community has been in the subcontinent for more than 2,000 years. At its peak in the 1940s, Mumbai's Jewish community had around 30,000 people. Now, an estimated 3,500 remain. Many of the city's synagogues and Jewish prayer halls are located in neighborhoods that have large Muslim populations. Yasin's work in the cemetery is an example of how the lives of these two communities are intersected.
पहले ये गिरोह बनाया सालोम रेमन अगरवारकर का ये पहला कबर में बनाया, ये 1971 में बनाया। प्राउड नू साथ दे है, इसके मतलब क्या? May his soul rest in peace.
I think we can stop here because you got the gist. Have you noticed anything about the inscriptions or about what he's saying? I think it might be a trick question. But if you look at it, he's copying the same thing all over again. He's not creative because he doesn't really know Hebrew. He knows how to write Hebrew and Hebrew letters. And he's copying a formula that was given to him. And in some way, he doesn't understand anything that he does. And I think this danger is hovering over almost everything that we do. And I will start by sharing my PowerPoint presentation about which Hebrew I think we should be focusing on teaching and why. Let me just share this. Which Hebrew? So I think a lot of you know that to get mastery of the Hebrew language, I believe it was the American Military Institute of Foreign Language Research that said that we need for Hebrew about 1,100.
screen, Tali?
Sorry?
Full screen, because it's
Oh,
like-
sorry, yes, I can try, just a second. If I knew how to do it.
it's okay, never mind.
Never mind, okay, I'm sorry.
If you put it in
apologize.
presentation mode.
Sorry. That doesn't help me. I'm sorry that I'm.
Go to view. If
In
you
the
go
bottom
to
right hand,
view.
in the bottom right hand
Yeah,
corner, there's a
slideshow.
little screen.
Where it says slideshow?
That one.
Oh, right there, right there, right there.
Here,
That one.
okay, got it.
There you go.
Okay, so we're talking about 1,100 hours, which let's admit most of us don't have. If we're looking at a school year, at least in the English school system, it's 36 weeks. Even if we have 2 or 3 hours, it is very unlikely that we will get to a level within, I don't know how many years of schooling you actually have, that is appropriate for having real proficiency in Hebrew, which means we don't have time to waste and that we generally have to choose our battles and what do we want to teach. I know there is a tendency, especially in religious schools and in Jewish schools, to go straight for biblical Hebrew, which I understand as an impulse in some way. If you look at how many words you need to speak a language freely, it is between 8,000 and 10,000 words. There are only about 8,000 words in the Bible. So if you achieve that, in theory, you are able to speak or to know all of biblical Hebrew. And there's something very comforting and very nice about the idea of knowing all the words, which I think is harder to achieve with modern Hebrew. Rabbinic Hebrew, as you can see, already has 20,000 words, and modern Hebrew triple that, more or less. Modern English, by comparison, you can see has 171,000 words in use. So it's never about knowing all of the language. It's always about knowing what the core is. And understanding what is the core and what is it that we really want to pass is what I want to focus on today. And I will talk about it from different perspective. So one of the questions that we ask ourselves is, do we want to teach all of the layers of Hebrew together, or do we want to teach them separately? Do we benefit anything from doing a class on biblical Hebrew, on rabbinic Hebrew, on modern Hebrew, or should we teach them all as one language? So there are very good arguments, I have to say, for both. For why separately, we all know that they have slightly different grammars. If you look at biblical Hebrew, what the word would mean in biblical Hebrew is definitely not what it would mean in modern Hebrew. Very often, this is the process of reviving the modern Hebrew language. They took very ancient words that nobody knows what they actually mean and turned them into something completely different. I think when you read Ezekiel, this is the most obvious example when you're talking about chashmal, which in modern Hebrew is, of course, electricity, and in biblical Hebrew, well, your guess is as good as mine as to what it is. Another famous example, of course, is ekdach, which we refer to as gun, and it is definitely not what it means in the Bible. So we want to convey to our students this understanding that their knowledge, even if they do have modern Hebrew of biblical Hebrew, is somewhat an illusion in some forms. Another thing which is practical is the ability of teachers. So sometimes teachers really do only have biblical Hebrew because that's what was taught at the university that they went to, which normally would mean that they might be capable of reading quite well or teaching how to read quite well, and maybe do a bit of reading comprehension. It would usually mean that their abilities to work in the other proficiencies are different. But we can, of course, say the opposite. When we have, and I know you're familiar with that because anyone who's working in our field knows that we have people who are very good speakers of modern Hebrew, but it doesn't mean that they know Hebrew as a language, or that they know how to teach it, or that they understand grammar, or that they understand morphology, or all of that. So some of it has to do with the context of what you have at your school, at your synagogue, at your rabbinical school, at your university. And we kind of have to work with what we have. And that's why I cannot give a definitive answer to the question. And there are, of course, different uses. So if I'm teaching bar mitzvah kids and I want them to be able to, let's be honest, recite their parasha, and maybe be able to translate it with a lot of help and possibly memorize this translation or memorize this portion, then obviously I have one purpose, and I'm going to serve that purpose. The best thing I can do for them is teach them how to properly read and vocalize Hebrew. Beyond that, I will need more hours and I will have a different goal. Why should we teach modern Hebrew and rabbinic Hebrew and biblical Hebrew as if they're one or together? I think first and foremost, because of the proficiency problem. So while we do have speakers of modern Hebrew, and it's very easy for us to be exposed to listening and to speaking. In modern Hebrew, it's a bit more of a challenge in biblical and in rabbinic Hebrew, where speakers are not really around. It is true that we're performing those texts, and they do go through the ear. So if you're looking at the Siddur or the prayer book or a Shabbat morning service, okay, they will probably be hearing, or students will be hearing at some level if they go to those institutions, ancient Hebrew, either rabbinic or biblical, being spoken. It still does not mean that they have the ability to understand what they're hearing, even if they're able to repeat the words. And I think everybody who works in a religious setting knows this very well, that children are singing a song that they've been taught, also not just in a religious setting. They will know the word or not know the meaning, or will not know how to connect the dots. So listening and speaking, reading and writing, as we know, are 4 different proficiencies. And since in language acquisition, and I think we have plenty of studies to show that, these 4 serve to reinforce each other. Just having the access to all 4 is something that helps create a better learner and a more efficient process of learning a language. And I will come back to that a bit later. Another good argument, I believe, for the question of should we teach different layers of Hebrew alone or together, is asking yourself, can a native speaker tell us what they're reading, even when they're reading the Bible or reading rabbinic literature? I see Sharon going, no. And I think that to a degree it is correct. There are some things that they will miss, and there will be structures they will not understand, especially in biblical Hebrew. But most of the time they will be able to identify what they don't know, apart from vocabulary, that they will be completely sure that they know what the word means when it doesn't. But they at least will be able to point to where their problem is. And being able to spot your weak spot, if you will, is already a big part of learning. And once again, what do we want to achieve? Do we want to get to a point where we have someone who is fluent in the language? Do we want to have a good synagogue participant? Do we want a rabbi that is able to function in Hebrew to the degree that their role asks them to? And I will give you some very sad examples in a couple of minutes about what kind of Hebrew we need and for what. And even though for some institutions and in some settings, it looks like we really only need classical Hebrew, be it Mishnaic Hebrew or Rabbinic Hebrew, later Rabbinic Hebrew, or Biblical Hebrew, these things do not necessarily work out very, very nicely. So let's look at Biblical Hebrew, and I'm going to be kind of not nice to it, not because I look down on Biblical Hebrew in any way, because I'm a practical human being. And unless you're a researcher in the field of Biblical Hebrew, we have to justify to ourselves why we put the very limited time that we have. Why do we dedicate it to Biblical Hebrew instead of modern Hebrew or Rabbinic Hebrew? So for arguments for studying Biblical Hebrew is that most of the high frequency words in Hebrew, even modern Hebrew, still do come from the Bible. Let me just show you for a second the slide. Oh, that looks really bad now. No, that is not the correct slide. I'll read you the words because you can't see. It's Et, Adonai, Asher, Ki. These are the most frequent words in the Bible. I wish I could play with this a bit. No, that doesn't help me. Vayomru Yisrael velo ben ish.
תנסי לעשות escape, לצאת מ-presentation mode, יכול להיות שזה יעזור? לא.
Escape כדי לצאת מ-presentation mode. Oh, here. Yes, it did help. Can you see it now?
עכשיו תלחצי על הריבועים. תלחצי על הריבועים ליד ה-X, במקום על הריבועים לעשות את זה.
אבל אפשר לקרוא, זה קטן, אבל אפשר לראות.
זה נורא קטן, but never mind, I'll just say it.
Tali, look on your right side, on the bottom, you see where it says 67%? אם תלחצי על הפלוס, הנה.
Yeah, okay. So you can see את אדוני אשר כי אל על לא כל ויאמר ישראל ואת ולא, because they're classified as different, never mind. בני בן איש עד מלך בית ויהי hu im. These are really, really high frequency words, both in ancient and in modern Hebrew. So if you get the core vocabulary, it's a very good start.
יש גם מילים מספר בראשית שמאוד, זה ארץ, שמיים, על חיות, שמש, ירח, כוכבים.
נכון. ארץ זה באמת אחת המילים הכי נפוצות בשפה העברית, ובתנ"ך נדמה לי שזה בשכיחות מאוד גבוהה. So we have a lot of the core vocabulary, if you will, of Hebrew in the Bible. So there is justification to go there. The other thing is how central the practice of Torah reading is in communal life. Okay, we would want to see every Jewish adult and every child that comes out of the Jewish school system as someone who is able to read a Torah portion, or at least to vocalize properly what they're reading, even if they don't fully understand it. And for that, there is justification and giving some time and investing in explaining grammar, in explaining structures, so that people have a bit more of a way into the language. Presuming that this is something that they do. But as we know, not everybody who studies Hebrew does this for ritual purposes. In this case, it is important. The nice thing about biblical Hebrew, as I said before, is it is contained and manageable. So you have about 8,000 words. You have that many binyanim and that many tenses, not as many as we have later on. We don't have things like participles and shmot peula and all of the things that develop later. So it's nice and small and compact, and perhaps if you have a limited time, depends again on what your goal is. This is something that you could probably manage more easily. Once again, most of the verb forms that we have in the Bible, apart from this weird, we'll talk about things that don't exist anymore a bit later. I'm not a linguist, this is not my thing, but I still, most of the verb forms do appear in modern Hebrew, and I'll ask you later, do you think if King David was walking the streets of Jerusalem today, would he understand what was going on around him or not? And you can tell me what you think of it later. Now I want to ask ourselves, why not teach biblical Hebrew? One is that it is for most ritual purposes, okay, for prayer, for saying Kaddish, which is something that a Jewish person would do at some point of their life, for participating in services, for weddings, for funerals, for everything around that. The thing that you would mostly use is Rabbinic Hebrew. It is true that there will be some Psalms and there will be some quotations from the Bible and so forth, but the core is still Passover Haggadah, okay? It is still Rabbinic Hebrew. So for Jewish life, in a way, Rabbinic Hebrew trumps biblical Hebrew. In terms of Torah reading, all the rabbis that I know, even the Israeli ones, do not dare extemporary translation of the Bible without looking at it before. I can say for myself that I check, mainly because I know that there are words in biblical Hebrew that I don't know. And also I never trust my English enough. So most people, especially those who chant the Torah, will go through a practice of memorizing the text and of looking up every word or a word that might be difficult and so forth. In that case, I'm not sure that this is where I would put all of my money, if you know what I mean, because I'm never expected to be creative in biblical Hebrew, not as a student, not as a teacher, not as a rabbi. It is, I mean, unless you're intending to invent a new religion that will speak biblical Hebrew again, I find it hard, but maybe people are more imaginative than me. 25% of those wonderful 8,000 words only appear once. So understanding what they mean in the Bible in itself is tricky. So once again, it is up to you if you want to invest in those 3 out of 4 words or in the 1 out of 4 that we don't really understand. 33% of the words in the Bible do not have the roots in the normal way that we are used to them in modern Hebrew. Even though a lot of them are very common words like av and im or yat. Okay, so if you know what the roots of these are, please let me know, because I don't. And we use them in modern Hebrew and in Rabbinic Hebrew. So they do survive. It's a bit of ambivalent. And then
Tali, slicha, can you repeat that? Did you say 33% of the verbs don't have roots in the normal
of
sense?
the words we can of not just verbs, also nouns. The words.
Okay.
think I've spoken too much about that. So let's talk about Rabbinic Hebrew for a moment, which you know is dear to my heart as teachers in the rabbinical school, as a scholar of rabbinic literature, and as a rabbi myself. I think that I prefer. I think there is more reason to teach Rabbinic Hebrew. Ultimately, I will come to the conclusion that you can teach modern Hebrew and then explain what happens in the past. But if you're gonna invest time in teaching a form of classical Hebrew, I would go with Rabbinic Hebrew, because the verb system that we see is pretty much stable until today. What develops in the rabbinic time stays with us. We have things like, you know, instead of hitpael that we find in biblical Hebrew and in modern Hebrew, rabbinic literature would have nitpael, but it survives in modern Hebrew, right? So we're not just talking about manishtana instead of mahishtana, or basically all of the passive hitpael, or not all, but many passive hitpael in modern Hebrew, like nitgalu, nishtanu. So it's still very much alive. So in terms of binyanim, they might have more emphasis on using some of the binyanim more than we do in modern Hebrew, but there is no fundamental change, so it doesn't bother us as much. In terms of the term system, things that we have in the Bible, like the short past, vayas instead of vayase, or the long future, right? Beit Yaakov yelchu ve'nelecha. So it survives in things like piyutim, right? In lecha dodi, or that is actually a locative. But there are some these very typical biblical Hebrew constructions. The future with a vav that turns the past and future with a vav. All of these things, they disappear in Rabbinic Hebrew already. And Rabbinic Hebrew in many ways is closer to modern Hebrew than before. The word shel, for example, is an invention of Rabbinic Hebrew. Before that, in the Tanakh, we have the construction of smichut, right? Melech malchei hamelachim, and which we would translate as melech shel hamelachim in Rabbinic or in Rabbinic Hebrew. Participles become very common in Rabbinic Hebrew. The whole invention of the present tense, if you will, comes along with this level of Mishnaic Hebrew. A lot of vocalizations that carry to our days come from that time, so that the shin smalit and sin sounding the same is something that happens at this period. We can see that they can no longer tell always the difference between ayin and aleph and hey and chet, and things that we think our students invented because they're not native Hebrew speakers apparently have been there for native Hebrew speakers many, many, many years ago. Things that we see in modern Hebrew, especially in the verbs, you know that hif'il has become hef'il to many speakers of modern Hebrew, which to people who care about the language, sometimes it hurts my ears, but I accept that this is the case. And also that there is historical precedence. So that the E and the A are close, as you all know, and other things that happened in classical rabbinic or in rabbinic Hebrew that we witness today, and we think that we're born today, and then we think they're modern mistakes, but they're not. One of the things that I think most of us as Hebrew teachers in some form are particularly sensitive to is when people use the number wrong, right? When they say that the number in one gender or and the noun in a different one, and we don't like to hear, I don't know what, shnei kalbot, or arba'a melachot, or all of these things that annoy us. They have, I can show you the text in Vaikra Rabbah, in Leviticus Rabbah, when they talk about arba ktarim berosh echad. So these are mistakes that apparently native speakers have been making since time immemorial. It's a bit annoying, but it's there. And it's if it comforts your students to know that, or if you want to hide it from them, that's your choice. The most important revolution, I think, in Rabbinic Hebrew is in the sentence structure. So we are very used in modern Hebrew to using subordinate clauses, right? אף על פי שלמרות כשהלכתי הביתה, הילד היה חולה. And whereas biblical Hebrew would normally try to have what we call main sentences, משפטים ראשיים מחוברים, and not so much psukiyot. So what we get, the tools that we get from Rabbinic Hebrew actually carry us quite far into modern Hebrew. Now I want to show you a bit of an example. So on the left here is a reworking by Chaim Nachman Bialik. I think you all know who he is, the National Poet of Israel, who wrote Sefer HaAgada, which is his collection of translations, if you will, and reworking of classical rabbinic texts. And so that's on the left side. And on the right side, what you have is the actual text from the 5th century Midrash, or late 4th century Midrash of Bereshit Rabbah. And I want to just, we can spot the differences. Okay, what did Bialik see and need to translate into modern Hebrew from the Rabbinic Hebrew? And tell me if you feel that it's necessary. So if you spot a difference, just unmute yourself and say so.
Are you asking for differences between the two?
Yeah. Can
So
you find
there's
any?
nun sofit tachat mem sofit, right? Tutin keneged tutin. Veharei keneged halo.
Okay, so we spotted two. There's also a bit of a translation from the Aramaic.
Yeah,
So the
There's more. That's the beginning.
I mean, when I looked at this, there were two things that I found striking. One is how little did he actually change in the text. And the differences that we saw, you know, harei yadecha meluflachot and halo yadecha meluflachot. I'm going to ask the native speakers of Hebrew here, do they feel that there is a difference in register between harei and halo? And does one ring more modern than the other? I don't see,
Can,
right?
can. Yes.
So which one is more modern?
But I feel that the difference is that it's contradiction versus like showing a fact. Your hands are dirty, but harei yadecha meluflachot vehalo yadecha meluflachot, but aren't they dirty? So it's kind of like almost a question, or that's what I see the difference.
So which one looks more natural to you as a native speaker? The right hand side. Harei.
I'm on my phone, but I can't really see which one is which. So I'm hearing what you're.
I think it's also your background as a native speaker. I think if your background, like mine, is someone that from early childhood, I'm used to read rabbinical texts. For example, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, if you are not coming from a religious, let's say, background, these initials or these short words will not say anything to you. But for me, it's like natural. I can read it without needing it to be more like to really literally to be written Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. So it's not equal, like not all native speakers are equal towards their understanding and relating to those rabbinical versus modern Hebrew texts.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the matter of abbreviations, definitely, I mean, it doesn't mean if you're not fluent in the lingo of rabbinic literature and understanding what is Arash, that is Amar Rabbi Shimon, then you can be a native speaker from here to eternity. But if you don't know that, you just don't know that. What was interesting to me, and the reason that I wanted to show you this, is to show basically how little did Bialik change in that transition between rabbinic Hebrew and modern Hebrew. And it's a bit manipulative because I could have chosen a text in which there's been a bit more change, but I cannot imagine a passage from biblical Hebrew that would be this identical in modern Hebrew. Okay, so for the reader of modern Hebrew, I don't think there are particular troubles or problems in reading this rabbinic Hebrew text, apart from, as we can see, these abbreviations, and possibly also the moment when we have a bit of Aramaic that Bialik kindly translates for us. So once again, I'm going to be very practical. What is it good for? I'm a bit provocative in the way that I put things, and I apologize. I hope you will forgive me. But the question that I ask myself when I teach is, what is it good for? What is my Hebrew good for? What am I going to do with this Hebrew after I've sat in the rabbinical school for 5 years, at the undergraduate university degree, at the school program, at the synagogue program? What am I going to do with it? And I think when you look at the people who probably use their Hebrew the most, which is rabbinical students, they often think that, they can get away with a lot because nobody's going to catch them. So unless they have Hebrew speakers, native Hebrew speakers on the congregations, they can get away with quite a lot. And I'm not saying it as a criticism of those people. They do what they can. And often in rabbinical schools, one of the problems that we see, and I know because I teach in one, is that the students focus very much on reading and being able to understand, and basically only on one proficiency, and other proficiencies are being left out. And often rabbis do not understand that they're going to be asked to produce and to prove text, as I said, text in rabbinic and in modern Hebrew. I cannot tell you how many times I've gotten a call or an email in the middle of whatever. I have a stone setting and I need you to check the Hebrew to tell me that it's correct. And often it wasn't correct because the male and female were not correct. The past tense was not correct. There were just words, as you said, like abbreviations that nobody already knew what they meant. Okay, different types of counting the years, all sorts of things that we don't even think about. Ktubot, I will show you in a minute the tragic case of Ktubot. A lot of the rabbis, especially in the progressive world, are engaged with creative liturgy, creating their own rituals, creating new blessings, creating new prayers around the COVID situation. There has been a lot of creativity and beautiful creativity. And often they want to translate what they're saying in English into Hebrew because it sounds more elevated and in a way more sacred. So we cannot really think, even of not of rabbis and not of anyone who's operating in a religious setting, even cheder teachers, as people who are never asked to engage with the active proficiencies in a language. So this is what I call, we cannot live by passive knowledge alone. And I might be speaking here from the pain of my experience as a teacher in a rabbinical school, and also as someone who sees things like this that I have to share with you. So I don't know if you've noticed this trend of people writing Ktubot now instead of in the ancient Aramaic and Hebrew. People want multi-faith Ktubot, people want LGBT Ktubot, people want non-binary Ktubot. People want to do a lot of things in Hebrew that are not always easy to do. And then they get beautiful, I'm being a bit ironic, things like, wait a minute. I'm getting the wrong thing, so let me just pull up the right thing so I don't show you my. So I'm showing you some texts of modern Ktubot that you can see online. Okay, if you're looking for a ketubah, you're looking to get married, and you want a text, and you want it to be egalitarian, and you want it to be nice. So you go on Ketubot online, because ketubah.com, because this is where everybody goes. And you find the ketubah, and the English looks wonderful. The English really does look well. But then, since you're all, or a lot of you are natives, you will see very quickly why I move uncomfortably in my chair. So first of all, I'm not even talking about the punctuation, which pains, it's painful to watch. But the Hebrew is so weird. Imtzetenu ledarkenu hameshutefet. Anu mavtichim le'ehov, le'okir, le'chabed u'le'ashir ze et zo. And now the weirdest. לבבותינו חוברים יחדיו לברית עולם ייחודית שביסודה חברות, הבנה והזדהות. I don't know, maybe, what do you see here in this text? Are you comfortable with it?
I am very much.
Why?
It's okay. It's just a cultural way to express Hebrew in a more poetic way.
יש פה בטוח שגיאה אחת, לבבותינו חוברים יחד בברית עולם, לא לברית עולם, זה בטוח אחד מהדברים. אבל מה זה ברית עולם ייחודית?
Why you can't say בברית עולם? It's okay.
נכון, בברית עולם, לא לברית. אתה לא חובר, הלבבות שלכם לא חוברים לברית.
בברית.
זה מה שאני אומרת, בברית עולם, אז זה בטוח טעות.
אוקיי, יותר כואב בעיניי, כשותפים לחיים, כן? לחיים, נחתור לבניית בית המסור למורשתנו היהודית, בית המקרין אהבה, שלום, סובלנות וצדקה. בהביטנו זה בעיניה של זו, and not the other way around, נגלה עולם חדש, והתקיים בנו האמור, okay. So I think what comes out for me very, very clearly from this
besides
text,
the gender thing, זה בעיניה של זו, who is the first? Also, I don't see any problem.
Well, it depends what you're doing, okay? It's, I want to show you how they're doing the LGBT ketubot, because the LGBT ketubah is the same. So if the rabbi doesn't know how to modify this, okay, so it has to change, it has to be changed to the plural masculine, or it has to be changed to the plural feminine, or it has to be some neutral form needs to be found. And it's normally not there on these texts. And this text, I think, for me, is a translation from the English. Okay, the grammar of this text is not Hebrew grammar. Nobody would say, Levavotenu chovrim yachdav livrit olam.
Tali, it's like somebody just generated some wonderful phrases from English into Google Translate, and that's what came out. I don't know if there was like a lot of attention to the grammar or what would sound appropriate in Hebrew. That's what I think.
I don't think this is the level of Google Translate. No way.
It is better than Google Translate.
I don't want to spoil the part. I don't want to.
אני מסכימה עם גל.
Yeah.
I don't want to
spoil the party. Come on, spoil the party.
I don't want to spoil the party, but I can imagine Israeli native speakers write even less than this one in a modern language.
אני חושבת שניסו פה לעשות עברית מודרנית בצורה כזאת קלאסית, משהו כזה קצת יותר היי, אבל לפחות כל מה שכתוב פה מבחינת תוכן, אני כאילו חושבת שהתוכן...
תחביר טוב.
התוכן, אני לא מתווכחת על התוכן. התוכן נפלא, זה כל אחד שזה.
כאילו, אם יש טעויות מסוימות של טעויות דקדוקיות, זה משהו אחר, אפשר לשפץ את זה, לשפצר את זה מה שאומרים. אז זה לא תורה מסיני, אני מבינה שפה אנשים עושים, משנים את הטקסט לפי מה שהם מאמינים בו, לפי הערכים שלהם. אז אני באמת לא רואה פה משהו נוראי, אני יכולה לראות פה שגיאות איך זה נקרא, פסיק וכל הדברים האלה, אני יכולה לראות דברים קטנים, אבל אני באמת לא חושבת שיש פה משהו נוראי. זה
Okay,
מודל.
I need to explain again why I'm bringing this example. The content, I don't care about the content. Okay, as soon as we entered a progressive world, the rabbis have a permission and a tradition of writing their own ktubot. Okay, so normally what you get is a congregant sending you this ktubah and saying, I want this. Okay, can you make it nicer? Can you make it work for me? And then you have to look at the text, and if you really know Hebrew, things like Bait Hamakrina Hava.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
בית מקרין אהבה מהמם. למה לא בית?
You hear that it's
beautiful.
יש שינוי בשפה, כאילו, אני בית...
אבל אתם מבינים שבית לא יכול להקרין אהבה.
אבל זה לא משנה, זה כמו דימוי. זה דימוי.
זה סימבולי.
זה לא דימוי, הבית לא מקרין אהבה, אנשים מקרינים אהבה, הבית יכול להיות מלא.
הבית הוא סמל, הבית הוא סמל לאנשים שגרים בו.
זה את האינטרפרטציה שלך, ואני מפרשת את זה לגמרי אחר, וזה לדעתי מה שיפה בעניין הזה. ונכון שיש פה את האנגלית, ונכון שניסו, אבל אני רואה בזה, אני רואה בניסוחים האלה יפים. זהו.
אפשר לשים את השירים של ביאליק תחת כזאת זכוכית מגדלת ולהגיד גם כן אותו דבר על העברית שלו.
לא כל כך.
הכניסיני תחת כנפך, אני יכול להיכנס מתחת לכנף של ציפור?
לא, העניין הוא לא כל לשון הציבורית. הכניסיני תחת כנפך זו אגב עברית יפה מאוד. נכון. השאלה היא לא השאלה של הדימוי.
בית המקרין אהבה זה עברית מדהימה.
אבל בגלל זה אני אומרת שזה Google Translate. A home projects love. A house does not project love.
זה לא משנה עוד פעם, זה פירוש איך שאת רואה את זה. אני רואה את הבית עצמו, אפילו הבית באנרגיות שלו מוביל לאיזשהו אנרגיה טובה, הוא מקרין כמו אור, כמו כוח. אני, הלוואי והבית שלי היה מקרין אהבה, והייתי קוראת לזה מקרין אהבה, והייתי כותבת שלטים, הבית שלי מקרין אהבה, לא אכפת לי מה היו אומרים. מקרין אהבה, אני מקרינה, הבית נותן את האנרגיות, מי שמאמין באנרגיות, זה יכול להיות מקרין אהבה, קרן אור.
אני חוזרת איתך שהרעיון נפלא. אני מדברת על התחביר לרגע, תסתכלו כמה טבעי התחביר לאנגלית, אוקיי? May we maintain the intimacy that fosters trust, honesty, and communication. Okay, as life partners, we shall strive to build a home committed to our Jewish heritage. Okay, a home emanating love, peace, tolerance, and charity.
A home.
אבל אני לא...
A home.
זה שהם תרגמו, עוד פעם, זה שזה גוגל טרנסלט וזה הם תרגמו, אז בסדר, אז עוד פעם אני אומרת, יכול להיות שזה, הם עשו דבר טעות פה, אבל טעות, הם לא ניסחו נכון,
לא
ואיזה
טעות.
רבי שמנסה לעשות משהו. אם זה היה נכנס איך זה נקרא, לנוסח סופי בחיים שלנו, אז בכלל היה משהו אחר, אבל שבן אדם, מראה איזשהו ניסוח כזה והוא לא פרפקט, זה פרפקט, כי החיים שלכם לא יהיו פרפקט.
אבל אין פה משהו חדש, תמיד בתרגום הולך לאיבוד איזשהו ערך, זה לא... השאלה אם הטקסט הזה נכתב במקור בעברית ואז הוא תורגם לאנגלית, או אם הוא נכתב במקור באנגלית ואז הוא תורגם לעברית. אז כן, יש פה איזושהי הפחתה בגובה של הטקסט, בסדר?
My point was not against the text, but Shira wanted to say something.
What I want to say is like, what are we discussing about? Not discussing, sorry, discussing about. It's the syntax, right? Like if we are really keeping the rules of the language and strictly, or we improvise and a little bit more patient with mistakes. I think this is where you're aiming for, and take two texts that are similar in the way, like translate or attempt to translate it in a way. Well, your question is like, if they were more knowledgeable about the Hebrew, they might produce a better text. And this is what the argue is actually how how much we invest in our language, learning it, understanding the grammar and everything to produce better text and to use it better. And are we forgiving for this kind of inaccuracy or little mistakes? Can we swallow it and ignore it? It's a Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel in this matter. Yeah.
So I'm Bet Hillel. I forgive everything. Okay, this is not a matter of forgiving. The point of bringing this to you, this text, and you engaging with it and protecting it and not protecting it and thinking maybe this could have been said better, is what I tried to show you is that rabbis and rabbinical schools and religious schools cannot be satisfied by only teaching passive proficiencies. Okay, every rabbi, every cheder leader, every teacher, okay, will come to a point when they will have to work actively with a text. They will have to adapt, they would have to translate, even though it looks like the texts are given. Okay, because you have to do that. Somebody did this for you, but you will have to, if it's now two women, just a second, if I have to adopt this ktuba for two women, I have to know how to change this correctly. If I have to adapt it to two men, if I have to adapt it to whatever it is that I'm adapting it to, if I have to change a prayer from a prayer for the sake of, I don't know what, where I live, the queen, to the president, I have to know how to do this. And we cannot stop with passive learning, which will take me to the next and last point. But Ilanit wanted to say something and I want to let her speak.
ואת המומחית בעיניי, אז אני לא אתנגד למה שאת אומרת, ואני אקבל 100% את מה שאת אומרת, כי את המומחית ואת יודעת ואת מבינה, אבל אני עדיין לא הבנתי, סליחה, אבל לא הצלחת להסביר לי מספיק טוב מה הייתה הבעיה. אני אגיד 100% שאת צודקת.
לא הייתה בעיה, הייתה פואנטה. הפואנטה הייתה...
נשארו לנו 5 דקות, בואי נמשיך לזה.
רק רגע, אבל אני רוצה לדעת, זה לא שווה לי לעבור בלי להבין.
אוקיי, so הפואנטה הייתה שהסיבה שאנחנו צריכים ללמד את העברית המודרנית, אוקיי? גם למי שכביכול לא מתעסק איתה, אוקיי? זה שבעל כורחו ולא בטובתו, בגלל הטבע של הדת שאנחנו עובדים בה היום, הם יצטרכו לכתוב בעברית ולהיות יצירתיים בעברית. כלומר, להשתמש ב-proficiencies of writing and of speaking more than we think that they would have to. And I think what the point was that in the progressive movements and progressive world especially, unlike in the Orthodox world, which might be less creative in terms of creating new prayers or altering ancient texts, this is part of the modern progressive rabbinate, that you need to use all of your proficiencies. This is the only point that I was trying to make.
Yeah, but this is like an endless learning and to become proficient in writing and reading and speaking. It's a goal. Not sure if we can accomplish that with all the rabbis in the world.
So what we can or cannot accomplish is, let me just, since I have like 3 minutes, I want to still share something with you because, and I know a lot of you have been working with different strategies of learning Hebrew and have been through many lectures, I assume, by Valdit and Professor Valdit Ringveld. I always get her last name wrong. And the question of me being a bit dyslexic, sorry, of proficiency and the 3 reading strategies. And I want to talk to you about how can you basically do it when you're reading an ancient text. So the methodology that I think is what I want to talk about, and I don't have much time because we got into this conversation, is if we take an ancient text, like the text that we saw before, okay? So just like with every other text, for the first reading, right? We read to see if we understand generally what's going on. Okay, so we understand that there is generally something going on with, there's a story, a parable, right? About a guy who's going into a garden and he does something with his hand and he's gathering whatever, strawberries or whatever they are. And somebody asks him, what have you done? And he says nothing. And the guy says, how can you say that when your hands are red? Okay, so we understand the general story. There is a conversation between 2 people. This is our initial reading. We might not understand every word, but we have a structure. Okay, then we go into the second reading in which we want to understand exactly the forms. Okay, why is it yadecha? Why is it en beyadiklum? Why are they playing with words like that instead of, you know, I didn't take anything? Why are they using the hands and so forth? And the third reading would be a third reading for deeper content and for understanding in a more creative way. So even if you do that, you can use the strategies that you use for modern Hebrew or for teaching modern Hebrew, whether it's staging this or asking them to paraphrase this and rewrite the story, plays the story as a little theater play between them, ask them questions about the story, and ask them in modern Hebrew, and then have them answer it with a vocabulary that you have here, which, well, in this particular specific story, there is no big difference between the rabbinic vocabulary and the modern Hebrew vocabulary. But everything that you can basically do when you're reading a modern Hebrew short text, you can employ in rabbinic, in teaching rabbinic and in teaching biblical Hebrew. And by using the same methods and by teaching basically rabbinic Hebrew and classical biblical Hebrew in modern Hebrew and engaging the students in speaking and in being creative, writing and speaking in modern Hebrew, even though it's not going to be perfect rabbinic Hebrew, even though it's not going to be perfect biblical Hebrew at all, you're giving them access to something that is going to be completely blocked from them and is going to produce really sad texts that we see sometimes. And I understand that maybe the text that I chose was not sad enough. So for my next presentation, I will choose a worse example, if you know what I mean. I hope I was able to make the point that teaching all the three layers together makes more sense than teaching them separately. And that starting from the present and going into the past, because of our ability to use modern Hebrew, and because this is who the teachers are, and this is what the context is, and these are not absolute truths, okay? It's something, everything that I say is contextual and is built around our own limitations, okay, of what we can achieve within a certain time. What is our goal for a specific type of Hebrew that we're teaching at that moment? And there will be different answers for different settings. And I don't know if I think I'm coming back at a certain point. And there, I think I'll focus more on specific techniques on how you do this. How do you bring on all three layers in one text and work with it? And this was more of a theoretical engagement. So thank you for listening for 50 something minutes.
Toda rabba lach. I want to thank you for coming here and imparting your knowledge upon us today. It was most fascinating and also fascinating discussion. And there is a recording of this, and we will make it available for whomever wants to view this at their own time. Tali, do you want to say anything else, or I know it's late on your /our end. So I don't want to hold you too long, but anything else you want to add?
If other people wanna comment or ask, or I mean, I'm happy to stay and discuss.
Yeah, זה יהיה מצוין.
Okay, as I can say, if you want to leave, please free to leave. אם עכשיו אנחנו רוצים, אפשר אני חושבת גם לדבר בעברית, אם זה בסדר מצד
מסיימים את ההקלטה, כן.
אז תודה לך.
בבקשה, בשמחה.
תודה רבה, טלי, היה מאוד מעניין. תודה רבה.
תודה, טלי, תמיד טוב לראות אותך.
כן, כיף לראות אותך גם, שרית.